All right, good afternoon, everybody. It is 1 o'clock, so we will get started today. My name is Devin Schoening. I'm in between, I guess, job titles, but I work for the Council Bluffs Community School District, and mostly my new role this coming year is as I think it's called virtual learning specialist, but I'm not really sure. I've been a technology coach and leader of our instructional technology program in Council Bluffs schools for the past 10 or 11 years. So that's kind of where I am and who I am. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you today. This is a webinar that I did for some folks in our district back in April as well. I have a site that I created that has a handful of webinars with different topics that you are going to be welcome to. It's certainly not just for people in my district, so I will post that link as we get going kind of later on before we're done. So you're welcome to go and use any of those materials or view any of those videos, those webinars, whatever you might want to do. So I will share that at the end. And as we're going along, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to stop me. Put something in the chat window or in the Q&A, and I'll be happy to stop and answer that. This is a webinar that I created again for some folks in our schools as we were considering, like everybody, how to best design online learning experiences for kids, especially at the time where we were doing it in a pinch. We didn't have a ton of teachers who were real skilled in that already. And so that's kind of where this comes from, and it will lean on an instructional model that I've learned a little bit about as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and share my screen and get going. But again, please, if you have questions along the way, please pop them in there and I'll be happy to come back and answer those. So we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll share my screen here. And so what we're going to do is really I'm going to be talking about some designing great online learning. But what I'm going to do that through is something called the 5Es instructional model. And it's an instructional model that has lots of history, and I'll go into that just a little bit. But really it's going to be about how do we utilize these different E's, these different elements of learning, again, that can take place in the classroom just as well as it can online, and what that looks like in designing great online learning. So with that, we'll kind of get going today and kind of get started. The first thing that I want to do is just kind of tell you the agenda. We've done a welcome. I've done a little bit of session description. I will talk a little bit about what this 5Es instructional model is, and then we will go through those 5Es and hopefully have some conversation around how those can be used in online spaces. But those really are going to be things like engage, explore, explain, elaborate or extend. You can use different terms there, and evaluate. And so during this time, we'll talk about what each of those phases look like. We'll talk about some tools that might be good to use within each phase. And then we'll also we'll try to share what this might look like if today was an actual lesson and not a webinar, what kinds of things I might have had you doing within each of those phases. And so that's kind of where we'll start. So to get going, the first thing I want to do is gather a little bit of information from you. So if you want to get to another tab and use a site called Menti, Mentimeter, so you go to menti.com, M-E-N-T-I-E, or M-E-N-T-I.com, and when you get there, it'll ask you to put in a code, and that 6-digit code is 599234. And what I want you to do as you get over there is just to think about a couple of words, a couple of terms that come to mind when you think about online learning. I think that some of us had an idea of what online learning was before. Some of us may have had some experience in either learning in an online space, in an online environment, or leading learning in an online environment. And then some of us may not have had any experience with online learning at all. And so what I want you to do is go over there and just kind of think about a couple of terms that you think of when we're coming up with this term online learning. So take just a minute and do that. I'm going to get out of this for just a quick second, and I'll head over and we'll see. So what will happen as you enter in some terms there is we'll just kind of create a little word cloud. And what it will help me do is maybe get a better understanding of where people are in terms of their thoughts around online learning, some concerns they may have. So lots can come from pulling in just a couple of terms from everybody, and you'll see those start to pop in. After you've entered a couple of terms there and you come back to our Zoom meeting, you'll start to see a word cloud kind of take shape, hopefully. We've had a couple of people put that in. I'm going to give that, another 30 seconds, 30 or 45 seconds to see if we can get some other terms in there. But what you might start to see there too are things that you maybe didn't put in initially, but you're like, oh yeah, I didn't think of that. Or it might help confirm some of the things that you're also thinking about when you consider that term of online learning. So as we see in those terms that are popping up, technology remains kind of the biggest one. Obviously there are going to be technological components of online learning that have to be in place to make it successful. And in today's webinar, we'll talk a little bit about that, mostly in terms of the tools that might be used, less in terms of the kind of hardware and network infrastructure that needs to be in place to make this work as well. But you see things like digital literacy and being personalized, the opportunity, great opportunity. I love that as a component of online learning as well, because I think the same way. While this has been really hard for everybody in all schools, it really does provide maybe a great opportunity to think differently about what learning might look like and how it could look, whether we're in the midst of a global pandemic or not. Maybe it's shining a light on some things that we could do, even when we're inside classes. So engaging, flexible, awkward for sure. I think everybody's been in that awkward Zoom meeting at some point in time, or been by someone who is awkward in that. Things that are convenient, impersonal. So all of these are not, some of them are very positive kinds of things, the great opportunities. Some are more troubling. Those ideas about this being impersonal really does make online learning tougher, makes it different. From doing this in class, distracted, kind of that same way. Awkward can be a bit of a, while not negative term, something that we certainly have to consider. So I love all those things. Keep those in mind as we go back and we start to think a little bit more about what this might look like. So Mentimeter is a great tool that you can use if you haven't used it before. It's a free tool. It's one of those tools that's freemium for sure. If you want to pay for it, there are components that you can use. But Mentimeter is a great tool, so we'll get back to that later as well. Click back in here. One thing that I want to say kind of right up front is that online learning is not intended to be a replication of what occurs in the classroom, right? It's a different space. We can't do exactly what we do in the classroom and just transfer that and do it online. We know that doesn't quite work. But what we do know is that there are components of things that we would do in the classroom, the components of a good lesson, the components of lesson design, lesson structure, delivery, that maybe we can use, that can be the same, even when we're in online spaces. And so we want to make sure that we're keeping that frame of mind in place too, that it's not a complete replacement of what we know good learning looks like. It's how do we make some of those components and some of those elements work for us. Like I said, we are going to spend some time today going through what is called the 5 E's. And it's a constructivist model, something that was developed a lot for science curriculum, but that is based on inquiry, and it helps to put students at the center of the learning. And so again, what I want us to consider is this idea that this isn't something special for being online. I would hope that even in classrooms, when we're able to get back with kids in the same space, that we're putting them at the center of the learning, and that we're thinking about how to make learning much more inquiry-based and transfer some of that power, transfer some of that ownership over to kids in classrooms. And so again, while I use this today as thinking about creating really great online learning, hopefully we can take some of these things and use them in the classroom as well. So what are the 5 E's? I mentioned them earlier, and we'll go into depth on them kind of starting now. The first one is engage. And again, just like thinking about what online learning looks like and what that means to you, hopefully as these terms come up, you're also thinking about that in your head too, like what does engage mean? What does explore mean? What does explain mean? And then we have elaborate and evaluate. All right, so those terms are going to have some inherent meaning to you. And I think a lot of what you might hold as your understanding of those terms right now is going to be confirmed by what we go through. And maybe there will be some things that make you think differently, or at least a little differently about those terms as well. But those will be the ones that we kind of we focus on for the rest of our time together today. Remembering that that fourth one, elaborate, I also put extend as a potential E that would be there as well. They kind of mean the same thing, and we'll get into that as we get going. So what we'll do is we'll start by going through each of these and talking about them kind of briefly. The first one is engage. And really what the engage phase is about is getting to know what kids know. You know, what do they already know about the topic, the content, subject matter, whatever it might be, but also to identify any potential gaps that we do need to fill in at some point in time. And so when we can find that information out, when we can see what kids know or what they think they know, and any gaps that might exist, that's going to help us in moving forward in some of these additional phases. Engage is also about getting students excited and interested in the content that we're going to be covering. It's providing a connection for them to the learning that's going to happen, maybe to something that they already have some knowledge about, some interest in, some experience with. So we want to make sure that part of this engage phase is going to get kids to want to continue that learning. It's going to provide that connection to concepts and ideas and content for them as we move forward. What we know is that while engage, in terms of the term, can mean that we're in the active part of doing something, it also means how are we connected to this? And I think that's really important. Engage is also the place where teachers create curiosity for students, right? So we can help create those engagements for them. We can help them become connected to or interested in topics by creating provocations and questions, using videos and other media to help connect them to that, to pique their interest, to poke that curiosity a little bit. This engage phase is not the place where we would necessarily be talking about teacher explanation, right? So direct instruction maybe, or opportunities for the teacher to step in and explain something fully to kids. This engage element, this engage part of this instructional model is really about kids, and it's about kids you know, making those connections, but also then taking questions that we've created and diving into that, figuring some things out. Not necessarily on their own, but it's not a place where they're going to be sitting and having a teacher or an expert or someone that's sitting in that classroom just explaining it away to them. And so those are kind of three really important components of that engage phase, right? Finding out interests, seeing what they know and what they don't know, and piquing that curiosity, having creating provocations and questions on the teacher end. That's the skill that we bring to this to help create that for them. So when we think about that, we want to see what might that look like in practice. So if we were in the actual engage phase with kids, what might that look like? And here are some things that might work for that. One might be creating a quick question inside of Google Classroom or any other learning management system that you might use to provoke students with a question or a prompt. Right? So if we're already living within Google Classroom or another learning management system, this is a place to do that. They're going to be in there already. How do I pose a question that doesn't necessarily look for a right answer, but helps build that curiosity and build that connection to the content or the subject matter or the ideas and the concepts that we're going to be looking at together. So that's one way to do it. I might be able to just simply come up with a great provocation or question and post it in that space that we use for kids to interact with. So that's one way to do that. A second would be to use a provocation that happens within a website like Wonderopolis, or The Kids Should Know This, where we find, or The Kids Should See This, sorry, what we find are great videos there and articles there that will allow kids to interact with some sort of content or some ideas in a way that hopefully, if we've done this skillfully, or we found the right provocation or question to go with the video, or found the right video just in and of itself, that will help them get into that content a little bit without necessarily just telling them, here's what we are going to learn. So if you haven't used The Kids Should See This or Wonderopolis, they're great places to just kind of spark curiosity, to engage kids in just wondering about ideas. And so these two tools and others might be ones that you could use to solely get kids interested in that. Another way that we might do that is to a tool like Padlet, or other sticky note tools. Padlet is a great one and one that a lot of people use. There's one that I love that's called Linoit. It's just a little bit different, allows you the use of some different colored sticky notes a little easier than might happen in Padlet. I love that. But it's a great place for students to share their thoughts. And they can do that with text and with images and videos and links and all of those pieces of media that they can come in and then share what they know or share things they don't know. Or, I can come in here as a teacher once all these ideas are there and start moving them around and seeing where some commonalities are. I can start organizing those a little bit so I can make some instructional decisions moving forward. So tools like Padlet are great, really easy to set up, really easy to share out and have kids posting pretty quickly. Again, or any other tool like that. But again, what this phase is about is figuring out what kids know, inspiring them to think about some content, and getting them excited about it and making that connection. Another way to do that is something like Google Forms. So a really great place to engage students and find out what they know is just to use forms, and not just the questions part of this, but really things for them to interact with. So am I utilizing video and potentially images? Am I using forms in a way that allows the way that kids answer questions to take them to a different part of the form potentially? So if they really do understand something and they prove that on a question, or if we're reading some piece of text in the form and answering a question, it's going to take them somewhere else to continue with that. If they're not necessarily getting that, if I see some gaps there, I can send them into another place of the form by using some branched forming within Google Forms. And that's another great way to do that. So again, what I'm trying to do in this phase is give them opportunities to interact with content, interact with ideas and concepts, see what they know, see what they don't know, and get them excited. So Forms is a really great way to do that as well. I think the last one I have here for this initial phase, the engage phase, is Mentimeter again. Mentimeter is a great way with lots of different kinds of slides, lots of different kinds of questions than maybe you would have in Google Forms. Where I can go in there and have kids, again, share some thoughts like we did with the word cloud. I can have them do some ranking and moving around of things. I can have them using sliders as part of the way they answer questions. I can show some content and just have them reflecting on that within Mentimeter. So again, it's not necessarily about the evaluation here, which we'll get to kind of the last phase, the last E. This is not about evaluating that. It's about gathering some evidence of what kids know and what they maybe don't know, or what level to which they know something, or they're activating that prior knowledge and having that information here for me. So when I can do that pretty easily by having them go to a link and put in a little code and answer some questions or interact with some content, that's a great way to kind of get this first E going. So that's the one that's the last one there that I would have for engage. Now, there are plenty of other tools to do that with. There are plenty of other ways to do that with. But what we're really trying to do are those three things like we talked about. So if this were a lesson today and not a webinar, here are some examples of things I might have done during this engagement phase. The first one is maybe I would have used Mentimeter to use or gather some information regarding online learning, which I did. Maybe that would have been something though that we did as a way to get us to the next phase, or as a way to get us to a next activity within the engagement phase. That might be a way to do that. I might share Catlin Tucker's videos about the 5 Ds. Catlin does amazing work. If you don't follow Catlin on Twitter, or you haven't read her blog, Catlin does amazing work, and she's got some great videos about the 5 Ds and how to utilize those in classrooms and in online learning. Maybe I would have shared that and just had you explore. That would be a way to do it. Have you read an article about the 5 Ds? Just the instructional model itself, find some information for that. Or the use of a provocative question or a statement to get you thinking about that. The little bit of one maybe that I would use, as we talked about earlier, is that online learning doesn't have to be completely different from what in-class learning looks like, but there might be some components that we can mix. That might be a statement that gets us going, that gets us to kind of thinking about that a little differently. And so that's kind of that first part. It's really just that engagement phase. And what I want to do just quick is just make sure there aren't any questions or thoughts about that phase that might help us, that we might want to discuss quickly. So I'll give you a second. If you have a question, I'd be happy to answer. If you have a thought about that, I'd be happy to kind of do that. Otherwise, we will move on to the next phase in just a second. All right. So as we get into thinking about the next phase of this, the next phase of this instructional model, we're going to think about explore. So again, if engage was like I'm making a connection to the learning, I'm provoking as a teacher, provoking or providing questions that kind of get us going. Explore is now the opportunity where students get to interact with the content. So I utilize that first phase to kind of figure out where kids are, what they know, what they don't know, get them excited. Now we get into the explore phase. And again, that really is that interaction with the content. So explore might look like research or an investigation or collaboration. So in this way, it's going to be time for kids to either go out and find some information or interact with some research that you have already found for them, pieces of text, videos, Google searches, those kinds of things. It could be an investigation. So I might focus that a little more as a teacher. I might have an investigation that kids are kind of following through, things for them to think about, to find, to explore, to read about, to watch. And I might have them collaborate on this. This might be something where they are working with other students within their classroom virtually to be able to kind of explore some of those topics. Now, in this phase, we can either provide resources for students or we can have them find their own and do the research on their own. I've always said that regardless of the age of student I might be working with, there's a progression that I think I would follow to get kids to doing their own research. I think we sometimes take for granted that maybe that kids know how to do research on their own already, and I don't know that they necessarily do. So one way to do that is to provide some resources for them. So I may go and find 3 or 4 or 5 articles, videos, those kinds of things, and share them with them on a Google Doc or in some slides or on a Wakelet or lots of other tools to share resources. And then what we would want to do is talk about what makes these good resources, what makes this website that I'm sharing, or this article that I'm sharing, a good resource for them to use. And once we've done that, then we move them in a direction where they're going to be able to do that research on their own. When you provide not just the actual resources, but provide a whole bunch of them. So if I can provide a bunch of articles and videos and images and pieces of audio, maybe podcasts, for them to explore around some content, they can pick and choose what they read. It's not a read this, then watch this. It's here are all these resources about this topic, about this idea, about this concept. Now explore it. This is a time, I think I have this on the next slide, maybe not, let me go back. Yeah, so this is a time for students to create and develop questions, right? So when they're exploring, because I'm not telling them do this and then this and then this, they have all of these resources to explore. It's a time for them to come up with and develop some questions and then ask questions. So this might be a thing where we have a space in our room, if we were doing this in an actual classroom or in an online space like a Padlet or something else like that, where we post our questions. These are the questions we want to dive into as we're exploring this content, as we're getting through this content or these ideas. It's also a time maybe they do that on their own. Maybe it's an individual Google Doc. Maybe it's an individual space, a note-taking space that they might have online to do that as well. But this really is about that idea of like, okay, we have all these resources, we've got this information about this content, these ideas, these concepts. Now explore it. What do you see? What do you notice? What do you have questions about? And we'll come back to that. Again, not a place yet for teachers to explain this away. We want to make sure that kids have time to develop and ask those questions. Students will also engage with resources here, and like I said, these can be resources that they either provide are provided to them or that they find on their own. And then what they do with that can also be individual or group. What I do want to know at the end of this explore phase, though, is what is it that they've learned, or what questions do they have, and how am I going to have them share that? And that's going to be an important part of this. I want them to be able to share something back, either with me as the teacher, with a small group, with the class, what it is that they've learned, what questions they've developed, because that should help us develop, should help us make decisions about what we're going to do next. And so that's kind of what this explore phase is all about. I have these resources, either ones I found or been given. I'm exploring those. I'm reading, I'm watching, I'm listening, I'm viewing, whatever it is. I'm developing questions, and then I'm going to do something with that. I'm going to share back what I found and what questions I have, either with my teacher or with a small group of people or with my entire class. All right. Before I get to this one, I just want to see, I saw there was a question here. Let's see. Click. Go. What's happening? Let me escape out of this. Q&A. So you by chance do these presentations in small groups, organizations? We have some. Yeah, I'd be happy to. You can get a hold of me. I'll throw my email address and or way to contact me in at the end. But yeah, I'd be happy to. Absolutely. Okay, let me go back over now. Oops, this one. Okay. So what might Explore look like in practice? It might look like this. It might look as simple as a Google search. Students go, they have maybe some, they've had this provocation or these questions that kind of guide their research, and then they use Google or other search engines to do their own research. This can be done with any group of kids, any group of students. You know, it doesn't matter necessarily if they're older or younger. Older students hopefully have had more, have more of a background with what good searching looks like, although that's not always true. And so, yeah, this can be done really with any level of kid. You know, if you've gone through the appropriate steps already, you know, you could have younger students going through and doing some research as well. We haven't used like a Google custom search engine before, where you can kind of create your own little Google search engine. You just put websites they're searching. So when they do a search, it's only searching the sites that you've approved. That's kind of a good way to kind of as a middle ground if you want to put in that kind of that little bit of work to create that. They're easy to create, but it's kind of an extra step to have them doing their own searching, but only searching sites you want. So that's a great way to do it. Google and other places where they can search is great to have them finding that information. You can certainly use sites like Teen Tribune, Tween Tribune, either one, Newsela, where there are articles that can be read at different Lexile levels. You can share those articles. They can explore that site on their own and do searching for different topics there. So those are great places to go, especially for text, and especially for text that's going to be more useful at different reading levels. And so those two tools are great for that. Insert learning is another kind of, as they're exploring a way to interact with websites that they're accessing, that they're utilizing. It's an extension that can be used in the Chrome browser to insert comments and questions and discussions on websites. It's something that's not completely free. It does have a lot of free components. It is something that can be shared. I really like the options that you can use within there and kind of use insert learning as a way to, again, highlight text and insert questions and have comments that you can go back to, and that link can be shared with the teacher so they can kind of see how they're interacting with text as well. There are other ways to do this out there, but insert learning is a great tool to be able to do that as well. YouTube is probably underutilized, at least in a really great way for students. You know, we always do, if we would ask this group and have people raise their hands of who has used YouTube to help them learn something or do something, like everybody's hand goes up, you know, how to make something, fix something, whatever it is at home. But lots and lots of great resources there for kids as well. And we don't want to necessarily just not go there because we know it can be a rabbit hole into all kinds of different things. But when used appropriately, and when we help kids utilize a tool like YouTube appropriately, man, there's all kinds of great stuff there. So YouTube would be another one that I would include here in this explore phase. Now, again, it could be, I could be creating, or not creating, but I could be pulling together these resources from YouTube, from Google, from Newsela, from all these places, and kind of putting them into a big bucket for kids to interact with as well. So if that might be the phase that we're in, and I'm not ready for them to necessarily go and do all this on their own and find things on their own, I can put them into a storage space, a holder, a container, and have them interact with resources there as well. So if this were a real lesson today, again, and we were thinking about the explore phase, here are things that I might have done with you. First, I might have provided you with a Google Doc that had links to explore, right? That's what I was talking about. That's a very simple version of a container. Here are all the things that you can explore. You don't have to do all of them. You don't have to go in order. Here are the resources, go with it. Based on a provocative statement or question, I could allow you to do some research on your own. And use a research guide. So we did this with fourth graders a few years ago. I kind of spearheaded a project with a colleague of mine where we had 4 fifth grade classrooms in our district in different schools, and we had them kind of pair up with, so the groups, they were in small groups, but the groups essentially consisted of 1 student from each classroom. They weren't the same school, they were different buildings. And what we had them do was pick a topic, do some research, explore a little bit, create a presentation, and then actually record it with Screencastify and present it. And they had to figure out how to do this from being in different places. We knew that it was important even then, this is a few years ago that we did this, but that their kids they're not always gonna be working with people who are sitting right next to them in the classroom. That it's good to figure out how do we make this work even when we're not in the same building. And so with that, we had a research guide for them. We had a place where they were putting in their guiding questions for the research they were doing. We had a place for them to put in here what are some links that you were using? What are some articles you were reading? And then give a real brief synopsis of that. What are some notes or some comments that you had from that research? So again, it's not a willy-nilly thing. It's not set them free, go research, and I don't know what you're doing. I can structure that in a way that does kind of help lead them through that process in a way that's going to be most beneficial to them. I could have also created a couple of insert learning activities to interact with text. So I could have created as a teacher some text, taken a website or an article or something, used insert learning to put in some comments, questions, places to highlight, and then shared that link where it was available then for you and as students here. So those might be ways that, again, we would utilize that, that we would say, okay, that's a way that this might look like if it was an actual lesson and not just a webinar today. Quick questions about the explore phase and what that might look like. Okay. Oops, 1 second, sorry. Didn't mean to do that. All right, the next phase then is explain. And so this is gonna be, you know, where the teacher comes in a little bit in terms of the teacher's voice. The teacher has obviously been a big part of designing the learning experience to this point. So whether it was the engage phase, whether it was the explore phase, the teacher is designing that for kids. The explain phase is again where we might get that teacher voice. So there are 2 ways to think about this. It's what teachers can do and what students can do. There's going to be explanation from both. The explain phase doesn't necessarily just mean, okay, now the teacher talks. It might mean that, but it doesn't necessarily have to. And here's what we mean. For students in the explain phase, this is going to be an opportunity for them to take what they learned in the other phases, in the engage phase and the explore phase, and share that understanding of what they've learned during with the rest of their class or with their small group or with their teacher. So this might happen, well, I'll save that. This is where students can explain that information. I'll give you some examples of that in just a second. For the teachers in this phase, this might be something that sounds like a little more traditional to you or something that you're familiar with. This might be an opportunity for some kind of brief, intentional direct instruction. It might be a focus lesson if we're thinking about that process, that instructional model. It might be a think aloud. It might be modeling. So all of those things might be here where the teachers can explain that. When we're doing it in an online space, we also then kind of delve into two other things we have to think about, and that's whether it's happening synchronously or asynchronously. And I can't remember if I have that in a slide or not. So if I come to a slide, I'll back at it a little bit. Synchronously would mean something like this, where we're on together using Zoom or Google Meet or whatever tool might be our place for synchronous online learning, where we are giving that direct instruction or that focused lesson, or we're doing that think aloud with everybody in the same space, online space at the same time. We also might do that asynchronously, which is really the creation of videos, right? So I might use Screencastify or WeVideo or another tool like that to create videos that can be accessed whenever they need to be accessed. So it doesn't have to be in real time. It doesn't have to be on Thursday at 1 o'clock at this link. It can be here, you know, this was created, this was recorded, you can access it whenever you need it. So we have to think about that synchronous versus asynchronous as well. This explanation can be, again, full class, small group, individual. So we may be doing these in different ways, just like we would in the classroom. So this is one of those examples of where the real classroom, like the real in-person, we're in the same space classroom, some of those elements can be moved into an online space as well. We might have a full class thing. We might be doing it with a small group. We might be doing it just one-on-one, doing some of that work. So this explanation phase can be any of those three. I thought I had a slide. I should have trusted my gut. Again, synchronous versus asynchronous, we've talked about. So what might this look like in practice if I'm thinking about the explain phase? Well, I might use Google Meet. Like I mentioned, we might have a whole class meeting. We might have that available where we're all going to try and, as many as we can, meet at the same time in the same place to have a bit of a conversation, or to lead that, to do an experiment, to do a think aloud, whatever it might be. Obviously, with Google Meet or Zoom or any of those tools, we can also record those so that students who were not able to attend in real time can also access that later on. Screencastify is a tool, again, that I share a lot. I love Screencastify. You know, just a screen recorder. You know, they've got some new features that are out now as well that allow for you to create assignments and really quick links for kids to be able to record videos and have them sent right back to you. So there are some things that Screencastify does that are great. Obviously, like many tools, this one is not completely free. So if you want videos longer than 5 minutes, if you want X number of videos in a month, all those things, you might think about the paid version as well. Edpuzzle or tools like it allow you to take video that exists, either that you've found or that you've created, either way. And within there, it allows you to add in stopping points in the video, stopping points to have them think about something, stopping points to ask a question, stopping points where you can insert your voice on top of that to kind of do a little think aloud about something that might have just happened in the video. But ways to kind of take video that exists and help explain a topic. So it doesn't always have to be necessarily the teacher doing it. In this case, with climate change, Bill Nye might be the exact right person to explain that. And if so, then we can utilize some of Bill Nye's video and insert our voice as well if we want to highlight a point, ask a question, provide something for them to think about, whatever it might be. So Edpuzzle is a great tool that has lots of video built in already, so you can get it from places like YouTube and National Geographic and TED and a million others. And so it allows you to kind of create that as an interactive piece for kids during that explain phase. And then I think the last one that I have for this phase is something like Flipgrid. So a great asynchronous tool to use for explanations. And again, this explanations for both. We talked about student explanations, we talked about teacher explanation. This is a great one where a teacher can actually utilize this and post a video as part of a topic and maybe explain something, and then get videos back from kids for them to explain exactly what they understand from that as well. So Flipgrid is a great tool for that, you know, so be able to share videos back and forth. And again, within there, like lots of tools, you have the ability to kind of tailor that to do whatever you want it to do. So there are some pieces in there that you can control. Oh, I did have one more, sorry. WeVideo. So WeVideo is really the one place online where we can do some full-on video editing. So creating some actual videos where I might be pulling in multiple video clips. You can also do screen recording in there. You can create GIFs inside of WeVideo now. WeVideo is a great tool. It's not free. You know, it's something that you're going to pay for. But, you know, I know at least for us as a district, I think it's the way, you know, we are going to purchase that for teachers and kids to be able to utilize that, knowing that how much more video we're probably going to be creating moving forward. So WeVideo is another one that I would certainly want you to look at if you haven't. Before I do that, let me see here if there are any questions. That's just the same one. I'm going to close that. Okay, so if this were a lesson today, again, if I was going to be doing this as a lesson, not a webinar, in the explain phase, there are things that I might do. This webinar would maybe be an example of something that we could use to explain, right? I'm explaining during this what this instructional model is. What I would be doing, though, is getting more feedback from you during this. Creating an Edpuzzle of one of Catlin Tucker's videos, that I talked about earlier. Catlin has done some amazing work, so using one of hers and highlighting some things that she's talking about. Creating a YouTube playlist, where there could be some further learning that happens, or something even like students explain theirs by creating a Screencastify video. They might also do that by creating some Google Slides. There are lots and lots of ways to do that. But how might they do it? I might have them do that by creating a Screencastify video and having them send that to me. Where I could either look at them individually or could share them with the class using whatever space it is that we use to share things back and forth. So that would be the explain phase. Explain, again, is where teacher voice comes in a little bit, and we also get some opportunities for student voice as well. If we're going to have to pay for it, isn't there one package? Yeah, that would be nice. It'd be great if there were some tools that, or package of tools that allow you to do everything. Unfortunately, that's just usually not the case. Each of these tools, each of these companies kind of do really specific kinds of things, and so that's just not always true. It's not always the case. I take something like we debated for us, like WeVideo versus Screencastify. Moving forward for video creation as a district, thinking, boy, we're probably not going to pay for both. I mean, we're not a huge district, but fairly large. I mean, we're around 9,500 kids, 700 teachers, something like that. And so it made more sense for us because of what you could do to do WeVideo. Now, there are some things that I like in terms of creating really quick screencasts. I would rather do that in Screencastify, but it doesn't do some of the other things that I would want it to do in terms of editing and using text on video and stuff like that. So yeah, I wish there was something that did all of it, but there just typically isn't. Okay. The next phase then is elaborate or extend. This is the phase that's really about, applying what we've learned, making those connections between what we know and what we don't know, making those connections between what we're interested in and what we've learned. This is that application phase. It's how do we take and now do something with the learning that's taken place so far. In the elaborate, this is taking something new and applying it to a new situation, right? Into something that's real, some real learning to solidify everything that we've done up to this point. And so it's an opportunity, again, to go and allow for more inquiry and more ownership by students, is that they can take these things they've learned, that they've become interested in maybe, and do something real with it. Now, that is tough. It's not always easy to do. They're not always going to be perfectly relevant to every kid or as authentic as we would like, but I think what we want to do is look at how many opportunities do we have to create real authentic learning opportunities for kids where they can solidify some of the things that we've been learning, the concepts, the ideas, so that they don't become just abstract. They don't become just things that they had to learn, that there's some meaning behind it. Elaborate also is the phase where students have the opportunity to practice and explain the how of their learning. And that how of their learning was emphasized, I know, in some of the things I read from Catlin Tucker. It's not just the what, it's the how. If they can explain their thinking, which we always talk about in education, right? You hear it all the time. It's not about the content necessarily, it's about the thinking, it's about the learning. So this is an opportunity during the elaborate phase for them to do something with their learning, but also then to explain the how of them going through that learning. It does provide us opportunities for student choice as well. This is a great phase for providing some options for kids and allowing them the choice in how they showcase what they know or show their understanding of different content, different ideas, different concepts, and not having it be just this is what we're doing, this is the project, this is the assignment, having some opportunities for choice here. So in practice, what might this look like? There are a few things. Quizlet is a good way to do that. That's a tool that you can use to create, teachers and really more importantly, kids can create study sets. They can create flashcards. They can start to make some meaning of the terms that they've learned, the concepts that they've been studying. So Quizlet's a way to do that. That again is a fairly traditional substitute for some things that we do in the classroom already, and those are not bad things. that substitution is not a bad thing. So this is a way to do that where they can then share that. They can get it back to me as the teacher. They can share it with their peers. Lots of things to do with that as a tool. As you'll see, multiple times, tools will come back and land in different phases to be used differently. Flipgrid can certainly be a beneficial tool for Elaborate, that phase. For students to describe their understanding, a great place again to provide a question or a provocation for them to think about the how of their learning, to be able to share with us what it is they know, but more importantly, how did they go about that learning? How is their learning, their understanding changed because of what they've been doing? Desmos is a really math-specific one, but a great, wonderful, powerful tool for math and science teachers where students can go in and apply the understanding of something that they've been learning about when thinking about graphing and thinking about the solutions to equations, things like that. Where again, when we start to pair those up with some other tools, you think about running Desmos with Screencastify, where I'm not only having kids use Desmos to kind of graph and show their understanding of those mathematical concepts, but I'm also having them record what they're doing on that screen so they can talk through it, so they can share their ideas and their thoughts, and then they can share that video back with me. So instead of just looking at a Desmos assignment that they might be turning in that shows, yeah, okay, they put in the right equations or they understood that, I can hear them talking through that. So it's not always individual tools, it is the combination of some of these tools that allow us kind of some of the most powerful learning opportunities. And then in that extend phase two, another one that I just love, and this is a very specific, it's kind of a math and sciencey one again, but if you haven't used PhET, and I need to change that, I didn't change the description down there. This is not Desmos. PhET is by a site created by the University of Colorado at Boulder, where you have all kinds of simulations and all kinds of different things that you can have kids explore and kind of apply their understanding of that. So this one that shows in the little GIF here is all about energy. And so you can see they can kind of change and start putting into place some of the things that they're learning. So making the mass of this larger or smaller, thinking about speed differently, different shapes for that, different paths for that skateboarder to follow. And again, if we tie that to other tools, we do something with Screencastify or WeVideo, we do something with just some audio and creating a little podcast. I even have this, but the audio that just goes with it, where I can hear them understand that, or with some Google Slides where they're taking some screenshots of what they're doing in PhET, putting them on slides and turning those in or sharing them. So lots of things that we can do with that during this extend phase or this elaborate phase. If again, this were a lesson today, what are some things that we may have done? I may have had to create a template using the 5 E's, so create a template for a lesson, right? What might this look like? That's the elaborate phase. So we take what we learn, we apply it to a new situation. In this case, it would be you thinking about your classroom. And groups of students might explore an individual phase and identify possible tools and tasks. So this might be, again, we would have some small groups in this phase, and somebody would be looking at the engage phase and really trying to dig into what this might look like to be able to share some ideas with the rest of our class as well. So that would be the elaborate phase. The last one, and I'm going to go quickly just to make sure that we have some time here at the end, a few minutes for any questions. So the evaluate phase is pretty much probably what you were thinking. It's what do they know and how do we know that they know it? That's what evaluation is going to do for us. That's what, without using, it's not necessarily assessments, that might look a little different, but we're just figuring out now at the end of this, what do we know and how do we know they know it? And if they don't, what are we going to do, right? So those are the questions that we would really be asking ourselves here. This phase also provides an opportunity for self-evaluation by students. So not only, again, is this like, oh, you did this assignment and I'm going to see how you did it, I'm going to give you a score. It provides an opportunity for us to give kids the chance to think about their thinking and to evaluate themselves. Not thinking at all here necessarily about grades, but really thinking about that idea of learning. What do they know? How do we know that? And how do they feel about that? Evaluate phase is also, can take many, many forms. They can be ongoing portfolios of work. They could be quizzes. They could be reflection pieces. They could be exit tickets. It could be the creation of a presentation or the completion of a different kind of assignment. But evaluate does not necessarily mean test. Those are not synonymous. And so we might have other ways for them to share their understanding that we can evaluate that understanding as well. That gets us past maybe some very traditional forms of how to do that. Evaluation also gives us some really important data, some formative data that can be used in making instructional decisions. It's also going to give us some different kind of longitudinal data over time. If we look at some of these ideas and do some of the same things with different classes and with different teachers in different classrooms. So it obviously gives us an opportunity to see some data and not just have the data. I get a little hung up on data sometimes. Data becomes something that people use and don't really do anything with it, but we just like having graphs and charts. I think it's much more important to be thinking about what it is, what are the learning opportunities we provided for kids, and then we look at the evaluation of that in terms of, okay, how do we know they know and what are we doing now? If we're using data to make those decisions, then obviously that's perfect. So what might this look like in practice? If we're thinking about evaluate, it's going to be very, I think aligned with what you might be thinking already, but here are some ideas. Google Slides or other tools that you use to create presentations is a really flexible tool that kids can use to share as evidence of what they have learned during this evaluation phase. Or during the evaluate phase. So Slides is again, just a very, very versatile tool. I think I have an entire webinar on different ways to use Slides beyond presentations on the website that I created, some webinars that I did in district. So that might be something to look for if you haven't used Slides all that much. Mentimeter shows up again because it's an easy way to create opportunities for kids to provide some information and for us to evaluate what they understand and also to collect the data. We will have lots and lots of data that we will get from using Mentimeter as well. Socrative is another tool that is something like Mentimeter, but the difference is you can do these ones a little easier on the fly. You can create some game types of things here. So it's a nice tool to be able to collect some data quickly to evaluate the understanding of individual kids and maybe more importantly, a class as a whole. So Socrative is a really great tool to do that as well. Quizzes, another way to do that. These last couple have really focused on that kind of traditional sense of quiz or test, but good ways to do those, especially online, and provide opportunities for kids to do that. If this were a lesson again today, what might we have done in this evaluate phase? I could have had you share your lesson. So in that last phase where maybe it was going to be take what you know and create a lesson template now based on using those 5 E's, you could have used that and shared it with me, and we could have created a structure that you're either getting feedback from me or you're getting some peer feedback on that. We could have looked at lessons created and assessed them based on a rubric we may have created together or a rubric that was provided where we can look at those lessons and the use of the 5 E's and that instructional practice, instructional model, and do that. And also requesting feedback. So using something like Flipgrid or another tool about how to make this entire thing better, right? How to make that lesson more effective. So gathering some of that information or some of that data is really important as well. So a last couple of things before I answer, I saw a couple of questions come in. Using the 5 E's is an instructional model that helps us consider what this might look like. Consider possibilities, consider what online learning could look like. And again, I want to add the caveat that I think this could really maybe be impactful on in classroom teaching and learning as well. But it also helps us think differently about what online instruction can look like. If we think about those different phases, we think about all the tools that are out there that allow us to do some of the things we want to do in each of these phases, it really opens up some real possibilities. So with that, I'm going to pop back over. I did see a couple of maybe questions pop in. When are you going to create one that does it? Yeah, I'm working on it, right? I think that's the $1 million question. If somebody can create something like that really does everything. Here's the hard part. I think there are things like learning management systems, some of them which have tried to do some of that, build in some of these components to their learning management system. So places to have, to do video, or the questions that are embedded. Like some of those things are there. What oftentimes occurs is that it becomes prohibitively expensive whether it's for a small district, which maybe doesn't have the kind of disposable piles of cash to buy those things, or even large districts where it becomes prohibitive because of the purely by numbers. You're talking about thousands and thousands of students and teachers, and each of those cost in some of those using some of those tools. So I think we have to consider that. We have to look at what's available, and that's why this becomes really, really hard. And I think it's so hard for classroom teachers who are in a classroom on a day-to-day basis, and they're doing all the things that are asked of teachers, to also ask them to stay up to date on tools that are available, and knowing how often tools change and new ones are created and old ones go away. That becomes almost a task that's impossible for teachers, and it makes me concerned for them. The other thing with that is, I've seen changes, even if we're just using something like Google Apps for Education. Districts were using that, and I'm sure it's true for other systems as well. But I'll have teachers where, Google changes the way things look, kind of all the time, and just small changes and subtle changes. I remember when mail went away from, there wasn't a compose button anymore, or an email button, it was just a plus button. Man, it was like, I had people contacting me essentially saying, why can't I compose email anymore? So when you take that to the nth degree, and you think about all the tools that are available, which ones are free, which ones are paid, which ones are, do I have some access to but not others, and which ones do I have to give data to, I have to have kids sign into? Man, there are so many. There are so many things to do and think about that. It makes it a tough job, an already tough job even tougher. So yeah, that's kind of where that's going to be. Stephanie, what do you suggest for virtual class discussions and ideas sharing besides classroom? I like sharing Google Slides with topic questions. Sometimes students mess with it. Yeah, so a couple of things. One thing I'll tell you with slides is, I was just working with a teacher today who is starting to create some digital lessons for the fall, and she's using Google Slides as well. But instead of just like putting the discussion prompts or the questions or the things on the slides, she makes those the background, so make it part of the master, so those things can't be changed. And then essentially what she does is, where there's a space for them to type, she puts that in there, so where they can just click, and it allows them to click and add text, but they can't change any of the questions or move any of that around. It becomes a background to the slide. So that's a really great way to do that. There are other tools you can use. I'm trying to think of the one that I just used that was new to me. It really allowed for a great place to do things like not only conversation and discussion, but almost things like a fishbowl activity, where you can have different levels of engagement in there for different kids, different roles. I'll put it in here. I'm sorry, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but that's a great one. For discussions, again, anywhere that you can have, I've even used sticky note tools like Padlet or Linoit to do some of that. So if you do that, then there's a chance for them to go in there and post some questions or post a thread of conversation. So those are good ones. I also have, I'm going to put in somewhere here, I don't even know where I put it, I need to look. I'll put the link to the webinar series that I created. There are a couple of things in there. There's one called Adding to Your Digital Toolbox. That's the one that actually has the tool that I'm thinking about that I can't remember off the top of my head, but that has some really good tools. Seesaw for younger kids has some opportunities for that. So if we're talking, it doesn't have to be younger kids, but it tends to be elementary kids that are using that tool in the middle school. There are some opportunities there to create some opportunities for discussion. Let's see, I'm trying to look at the other ones I did. The Google Slides one, the More Than Presentations, that has some ways to do that as well. So those would be some examples of that. And oftentimes the reason I like the Google Slides example, where she uses it to make it the background of the slide, is because it's using a tool that we're already familiar with and just changing it and making it do what we want it to do. That sometimes is a little easier than going out and trying to learn a bunch of new tools. So Tony Vincent, if anybody follows Tony Vincent on Twitter or has gone to Tony's workshops or sessions at conferences, Tony's great. Tony and I have talked about this a few times. He's a great guy. And he said something at a conference once that we were talking about hacking tools to make them do what we want them to do. So yeah, Google Slides, if we just look at it, it's PowerPoint, right? It's what people say. I create a presentation there, but why can't I make it do other things? Why can't I make it so that the background, it becomes a place for kids to have conversation? Why can't I change the format of that page to not be a slide, but to be a document and do something with it that way? Why can't I, make that tool do what I want it to do, as opposed to going and trying to find another tool to learn to do that? So that's really become a focus of mine too. When I work with people, it's like, let's try and use the tools that you really like, the tools that you're familiar with, and make them do what we want them to do. Make the tool work for us, as opposed to just using the tool in a way that maybe it was, appears to be intended to be used. So with that, I know we're at 2 o'clock. I'm happy to answer any other questions if people have them. I'm missing all those. I am so sorry. Yeah, great job. Thank you. Okay, so I didn't miss those. I was looking in the wrong place. I only had the Q&A up. I apologize. Yeah, so if you need anything, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to paste a couple of things in here quick. That's the site that has my webinar stuff that I've already done, and you're welcome to that. I will put my email in here as well. I don't know if DoSpace sends that out or if you have it or not, but that's it. You are certainly welcome to contact me on Twitter. I'm there quite a bit, so you can reach me there as well. So with that, I know it's 2 o'clock. I thank you for coming. If you do have questions, please don't hesitate to send them my way, and I hope you have a great day.